Namaste and welcome to this 7 p.m. show today. And today we are going to go with the episode 3 of what we have called the Christian Conversion Syndrome series. You've seen in the episode 2, you've seen Esther Dhanraj make a presentation on the very fundamental of the Christian belief, and that is creationism. Esther Dhanraj, you know very well. And today I have got Dr. Raj Vedam, and Dr. Raj Vedam is also very familiar to you on Jaipur Dialogues. He is from the United States, and he is basically a technocrat who has very deep understanding of Indic issues and other philosophical issues. Somehow, technocrats also make very good Indic experts these days. Okay, not a laughing matter, certainly. Esther, I would like to bring you into the picture at this point. You made an excellent presentation on the first and the most important fundamental of the Christian belief, that is creationism. And can you just summarize your presentation that you did last time? And then Dr. Raj Vedam can counter them.
Yes. First of all, namaste to Sanjay ji, Raj ji, and all the audiences of Jaipur Dialogues. So yeah, when you said that Indic experts, technocrats these days make great Indic experts, that laugh was smile of pride. You know, the parallel that you drew between science and Indic knowledge systems, that is what should make us all proud. So that was a smile of pride. I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you.
So
because yes, I'm also a technocrat basically. So
yes, I know, which is why I'm not. So happy to be on the show, back on the show, and I'm glad you said some good things about the presentation last week. So that was the most fundamental belief of fundamental Christians. So that's about creationism. So Raji, what I'll do is I'll just summarize the points, the core beliefs of creationists, the fundamental Christians on the beginnings of the universe, and then I'll ask you my question.
Sounds good, Esther.
Yes. So I have summarized here in about 8 or 9 points. So they believe that all life was created in 6 days. Man was created in the image of God, and God breathed literally life into Adam's nostrils. The second belief is God gave Adam the primeval Garden of Eden to tend, and he made Adam the master over the rest of the creation. So he gave dominion basically to the rest of the creation. And the third belief is God saw that Adam needed company, so he created a female, Eve, from Adam's rib. If there is time, I would like to ask you why it was a female that God had to create and not another male. I'm very curious to know the answer to that. So the fourth belief is the innocent humans yield to the temptations of a talking serpent and eat the forbidden fruit that God actually basically forbids, the Christian God. And then they also believe that God punishes them because they disobeyed him and he expels them out of Eden. Sixth belief is they say God soon regrets making man. So he drowns his entire creation in a worldwide flood, except for one family, which is Noah's family. The next belief is all of this that I just said, all of these points, these beliefs, this entire event is recorded in the book of Genesis, which is the very first book of the Judeo-Christian Bible. And Genesis is a historical event. It's not to be mistaken to be a metaphor or it's not analogy, it's not allegorical. It is a historical event. And this event is the basis for the need for salvation, which is the original sin. and salvation comes only through Jesus Christ. So these are some of the core beliefs of creationists. Fundamentalist Christians, I would say, not just creationists. So here's where my question comes. So all this defies the scientific understanding of the beginning of life forms, the beginning of universe per se. So my question to you is, if a talking serpent is bizarre and it cannot be taken as science, how do you justify the Puranic model of the beginning of life on our planet?
That's a excellent question. Thank you, Esther ji, and thank you, Sanjay ji, for inviting me on this show. So I think at the outset, we need to appreciate that there are fundamental differences in the nature of works in the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Dharmic tradition. There is a big difference in the way these works are done. What we find in the Puranic accounts are that the Puranas are literally encyclopedic works of knowledge. They contain several sections. They contain sections on cosmology. They contain sections on cosmogony. They contain sections on stories, sections on genealogies, and so on. So there's a lot of information there. And what we see is it's an encyclopedic kind of content. And there are 18 Mahapuranas, just for the point over here. Now, one thing we should note is early on, wisdom was encoded in the metaphor of stories. And why is that? The first question is, why would wisdom be encoded in stories? We got to first address that point. It turns out that, for example, if I am a PhD engineer, and I am, and if I were to work on, let's say, the power system, the entire interconnected power system in India, and get the nonlinear equations and dynamical differential equations, look at the stability, look at the profiles, loading, and all those kind of things, I decide that to keep this grid stable, we need to do these operations. So I reduce down my stability studies to a set of operations for the operator. The operator might go, I might tell the operator that if this voltage goes up, turn this knob. If this frequency goes down, turn this knob. So the stability, which is studied at a very deep mathematical level, has been reduced to a set of practices. The operator now looks at a meter and he does those operations and keeps the system stable. He need not know what the PhD engineer is doing. Similarly, in today's times with COVID and everything, we got PhD biochemists who are out there, who are learning the pathways to the disease. How does this disease affect us? What are the pathways for drugs? We're going to deliver drugs. How is that going to work? So eventually, they figure out some drugs and some vaccines and so on, and they do their stuff. Now, when a general practitioner doctor comes along, he is not concerned with all of these things. He can be, but he is not. Rather, he looks at the clinical studies. He said, look, clinical studies were done, and here's a bell curve. Most of the people 5 mg of this medication for 3 times a day, and he's going to be cured in 3 days. So this kind of statistical work is good enough, and they can prescribe what they need to do. Our rishis were like this. They were the knowledge producers. They saw through their states of meditation, through contemplation, through getting away from it all and trying to understand the nature of reality, how things work in the universe, and so on. They understood workings. Now, you should imagine also they lived in an era where words did not exist to describe phenomena that they were trying to explain. Today, we got all kinds of words like differential equations, quantum mechanics, and all those kind of things. In an earlier time, what they did was they used divinities. They used the palette of divinities, they used characters, and they wove them into stories that would encode some wisdom. And this is what they did. When the practitioner comes along, he knows that the rishi has put it into a story, and I need to follow this formula, and things can happen. And if one asks, where is the evidence for all of these things? We see that when Playfair, one of the colonialists, he came to India in around 1800s, he goes and looks at a Jyotisha expert in India who's doing his work. He's saying that the Jyotisha is sitting there, fully confident in his methods. He's taking the shells and he's putting it over there, looking at the shell, making some calculations, then taking an index of palm leaves, reading into that. And he's saying the eclipse will start at this time, the eclipse will end at this time with great certainty. But he has no idea why those calculations work. So this shows that Aryabhata's methods and others were put into formulas which the practitioner does even at the time of playfair, but they have no idea why it works. Repeatedly, we see that the rishis simplified the language of science into the metaphor of stories and gave it to us. I'm very fond of saying the story of Chandra and the nakshatras, right? So the analogy says that, the metaphor over here says that Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha. So over here, the person who goes at a naive level and takes the story for what it is, he says, how can Chandra even be a man? And what is the meaning of marrying nakshatras? Are they women? And all this kind of thing. These stories come and people are lost. The reason is you have lost sight of the key to unlock the wisdom metaphor. And that is what is going on. If one understands that this is a metaphor for the moon tracing a path of 13 and 1/3 degrees in a 24-hour period, in which time it goes from one quadrant to the other, which is what a nakshatra is. If one understands that wisdom, it says, I know what the rishis are trying to say in the story. So the stories communicate to us in a very entertaining capsule what that information is. And we are seeing this repeatedly. Now, what does the Purana story say about cosmology or cosmogony? They have a lot of things to say. Have a lot of things to say. If we take, for example, Bhagavata Purana and we go into Brahma's day and night, he starts talking about enormous periods of time, starting from the Chaturyuga system, where you had a 4:3:2:1 ratio between the Kali Yuga, Dwapara, Treta, and the Satya. And if you were to add these things, it comes about 3.2 million years. And from there on, if you take a certain number of Chaturyugas, that forms a bigger unit of time, Manvantara. From there, you go to Kalpa. From there, you go to the day and night of Brahma. And from there, you go to concepts of Pralaya and Kalpa. In other words, dissolution of the universe and the creation of the universe. It goes through these cycles in enormous periods of time. Now, here is the punchline. The kind of timelines envisioned by our rishis matches very well or very closely with what modern science is trying to tell us. Modern science is making an estimate, saying, looking at the expansion rate of galaxies and working backwards in time and trying to say at some point everything must have been a dense singularity, if you will. And they're saying about 14 billion years. That is around the time approximately when this whole inflation event started. So if you were to take Brahma's day and night period of Sandhi, which is a time of rest, you'll find that these numbers are adding up to this kind of a timeline. It is not 6-day creation. It is an enormous timeline for creation. And what is creation itself? It is trying to say that initially, if you look, for example, at Rig Veda Nasadiya Sutta, it is telling that initially there was no light, there was no darkness, there is no air, there is nothing. Only the one existed, windlessly, and only that one existed. But after making that prediction, it realizes that there might have to be a correction. So it steps back and asks, says, but who knows? Who knows how it would have been? Even the Devatas are later in the creation cycle. So who knows what the reality might have been? Maybe even he, the highest, even perhaps he or she also doesn't know. So this is the nature of the creation that is embedded over here. It is highly critical. Not only is it making a postulate, it is also putting in there, understanding that the hypothesis and a correction might be needed. It is coming back and saying, who knows, maybe even the creator does not know. So this is the spirit of inquiry that is built into some of the earliest texts that we see. Stark contrast to dogma-ridden texts that have certain events that are absolutely necessary for a theology to exist. For example, a creation event, a 6-day creation event, or a fall from grace. And these kind of things are absolutely necessary events. There's no questioning about that. But the Indic texts clearly show that understanding can be encoded in various ways. Our role is to understand the nature of reality. Now, from that, I'll give one more example. If you read the Devi Suttam now says in some place, it says that whoever is eating, breathing, seeing, hearing, everything happens through me. That is what Devi Suttam is saying. So in other words, every aspect of reality, Prakriti, is through Devi. This is what it is saying. So in our understanding, in the early Puranic text, it talks about, for example, at the beginning of creation, Narayana is there. And from Narayana's expression comes Brahma, which is again metaphorical understanding. Brahma is shown with coming out of his navel in a lotus. That does not mean literally that. It means Brahma does not have existence independent of Narayana. I think that is the metaphor that is coming out of that. And at that point, it says that the three gunas were in unmixed, unmanifest state. And the gunas are the sattvic, the rajasic, tamasic. These gunas are in perfect equilibrium, unmixed state. And then it goes through a process of the gunas mixed, but they're still in unmanifest state. Prakriti and Purusha makes the manifest universe come about. So that is the beginning of the manifestation of the universe. And here Purusha is seen as a nirguna aspect of Brahman, which is to say there is no form or anything to this entity. This is where all Atman, everything has its roots over. And in our understanding, it says, for example, the Atman, the individual Atman, is covered by a sheath, if you will, for this physical existence. It is talking about Annamaya Kosha, which is that, for example, the foods that we eat and everything gives rise to this material body. Similarly, there are other kinds of sheaths on us, the Manomaya Kosha, then the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and so on. So we have got about 5 koshas that define our existence in relation to understanding what is this body in relation to the intellect, in relation to the mind, in relation to Brahman. So there are attempts by several Puranic authors or rishis of the past to try and express these understandings in various metaphors. Throughout the Puranas, you'll see a story which is in a question and answer format. Some king will go and ask a rishi, so tell me, rishi, how did this happen? What is the story about Bhagavan? I wish to understand that. And the rishi is going to say that. Or somebody goes to Narada and asks, Narada, please tell me what happened over here. So every one of them is in a story format. None of them are dogmatic. Every one of them emphasize the need to continue learning. And we see that repeatedly. If all there was to understand about existence and creation was Prakriti, Purusha, Atman, and the 5 koshas on us, then why on earth would Shushruta or Charaka start writing these huge compendiums understanding the human body at minute details, the bones, the blood, the tissues, and other such things? They go into great detail understanding the nature of disease, how the body interacts with something else, how do you cure it, and so on. So what this shows is Indians did not lock themselves into some kind of a frozen dogma-laden statement at some point in time. They understood very well various levels of understanding. For one level of understanding, the meta stories works very well. If we have the key to unlock the wisdom, and who gives that key? The key is given by a guru or an acharya or some teacher who says, to understand that story, here is what you must unlock it with. We then have the understanding. And a different kind of understanding, the student who goes to, let's say, Nalanda or Takshashila and has about 17, 18 years education, that is the kind of background you need to analyze some of the hugely mathematical Siddhantic astronomy works or the medical works and other such things. You're like a professor at that point, coming out understanding very, very clearly what this knowledge is all about. So we are seeing in India, ancient India, no dogma-laden statements that lock people into an illiterate way of life, but constantly the exhortation to understand the nature of reality, to understand the true nature of the self, to dispel the avidya about our existence and understand that we are Brahman. So these kind of things makes us seekers. We are seeking reality. We're seeking the truth of existence, seeking the truth of nature. And towards that, we have got so many of darshanas. Darshanas are a way of looking at nature and world. And if you take, for example, Rishi Kannada, who talks about Vaisheshika, we see perception and inference. Perception and inference to understand the nature of reality. And he's got so many physical laws and other things encoded in his works by the kind of understandings that come about with that darshana. And also Indians have a well-developed epistemology. They had so many of the pramanas, understanding of pramanas, understanding what is a valid means for knowledge generation and how one can rebut some kind of illogical statements, irrational statements, proofs coming outside the epistemology that you put in that particular darshana. Very, very well developed epistemology was there for Indians to understand reality, nature, and so on. So, Esther, there's a long answer to your question, but then it is important because people keep coming and saying, yeah, the Puranas are talking about this fantastical story, and there's another fantastical story. And what is this? The mistake is people are mistaking these for religiosity. That is never the intention of these texts. These texts are intended to communicate metaphorical wisdom, and you need the help of a guru or acharya to unlock the wisdom over there. And one has got deep understandings, and you're not locked in to a tradition, not locked into a dogma. Your role is to have the understandings of past masters, make that part of your own journey, and you try to make a better understanding of what nature is all about.
Correct.
Long answer,
So,
but I hope that
Yes, that is an excellent answer. Just interject a little bit and do my formalities with my audience. Please subscribe to this channel and like and share the video before you move on further. All those who are watching, please subscribe. Okay, Esther, all yours.
So, Raji, you said that our rishis, our munis, actually went into a state of contemplation, and that is how they came up with this wisdom. Now, what if I said that why would you deny the revelation of the biblical authors? Moses, for example, he went up the hill for a few days. Why can't we take it as he went into a contemplative state to get those 10 commandments down the hill? So how does the rishis' contemplation contrast with the contemplative methods or the divine revelation of biblical authors?
Okay, that's a good question, Esther ji. So I have no problem with it. I have no problem with somebody coming with their belief systems and saying that in our belief systems, this man went into a cave and heard Archangel Gabriel telling him something, or that man went off to the desert, talked to a burning bush. If that is what one wants to believe in, they are welcome to do that. But the minute that kind of ideology is impressed upon me to say that I believe to a false way of life, fallen way of life, or a sinner way of life, and I need some redemptive qualities of this religion or this dogma to be saved, salvation, or by the mercy of some being over there, I'll be admitted to Jannat or whatever, then I've got a right to critique that. So that is the only context in which I'm critiquing these things. So if Moses is supposedly having gone to Mount and Arafat or whatever, and he's supposed to have got the 10 commandments from either God or an angel or whatever, that is their belief system. They are welcome to it. But then one understands that in their belief systems and so on, everything is dogma. Everything is set literally in stone. Forgive the pun over here, 10 commandments in stone, but these things are set in stone literally over here, where you cannot negotiate, you cannot try to do away, you cannot bend the rules, you cannot work around the rules. These are what is required. Only if you follow these rules, then you have satisfied the requirements of whatever that covenant you made with the deity or whatever. So there is no two ways about it. That is the bottom line. And in the Indic tradition, we don't find evidence of this at all. Anywhere we don't find evidence of this. I don't think Shushruta said, if you don't read my Shushruta Samhita, your head will break into 1 million pieces. I don't think he said that. That's the only way to do it. And therefore, we see Shushruta Samhita, Charaka Samhita, Vagbhatta's works, and so many others after him have added to the compendium of knowledge and building to knowledge. Similarly, in works like starting with stories encoded in astronomical context, starting from stories to Siddhantic astronomy, to the works of Aryabhatta, to the works of Brahmagupta, Bhaskara, Varahamira, going on to Kerala School of Math, we don't see them stuck in some dogma saying that Lagada said this in some other text, or some Vedanga Jyotisha said this, I'm not going beyond that. Of course, from time to time, we might see some fundamentalist practitioners saying that I don't believe in any of these things, and this is what is the correct thing because some author in the distant past has said this. We still see a few people saying this, but the reality is that none of the Indian texts have claimed a divine lock and key on truth. They have not said that we are exclusive possessors of this truth and the rest of you are illiterate guys walking around in a daze with no truth in your lives. You need the illuminating wisdom of this to save you. I don't think any Indian text says that. So this is the fundamental difference between the Abrahamic context where they go off into contemplative and come with some wisdom, but these wisdoms are really lock and chain. They shackle the mind, they lock you to a way of a stratified way of thinking, and you're not permitted to get out because of blasphemy, because devil is lurking at every exit door. You go towards an exit door, there's devil waiting there for you. Satan is waiting and tempting you over there. So you scurry back to the familiar cocooned interior of the dogma and hoping that you're in the right books or good graces of this divinity. So this kind of thinking makes one a follower. So you're basically a follower in this tradition as opposed to a seeker. So in this tradition, the Indic tradition, Dharmic tradition, you're always a seeker, always seeking knowledge, always refining what the past understanding was and what the present understanding is. And we are seeing that again and again. For example, Parameshwara in 10th century, he did not understand some of Aryabhata's works very well. So he set about to critique some of Aryabhata's works and said, Acharya Aryabhata said all these things, but I don't understand how that is possible. Maybe this is the correct thing. So clearly we are seeing a tradition in the Indian context of trying to take a wisdom of the past, questioning it, not trying to say, oh my God, Acharya said this and I'm going to believe in that, nothing else. But they question that wisdom and try to propose a new hypothesis. Late commentators might come and they corrected Parameshwara too. Later commentators came and like Bhaskara II and others, they said that, no, his understanding was wrong, Aryabhata was right. So this kind of tradition, this kind of an active research tradition is visible in the Indian context. Therefore, no meditative states that our rishis and scientists went into, they never said, I have understood the truth and none of you can challenge this and this is what it is. Every rishi understood that everybody's journey is individual because of the karmic baggage that we come along with in this life. That rishi's journey cannot become your journey 100% by emulating him. You cannot say, here is a perfect man. He lived a perfect life. I'll emulate him 100% and therefore even I'll be like this perfect man of the past. That is not possible over here. The rishis had understood that everybody's life is individual. So there were guideposts. They were guideposts for what is dharma, what is dharma shastra, what are the good things you can do, what are the yamas and the niyamas, good works, good thoughts, and other things that will help you along to progress on a spiritual journey to closer to understanding Brahman. So we see evidence of this in every darshana, every text that you have, every sampradaya you have. We see these kind of things coming about. So there is never the dogma-related context that we see in the Abrahamic traditions. Meditation has got a deeply different context in these two traditions. In the Indic tradition, it has always been to dispel the avidya about our existence and understand that we are Brahman. In order to understand that, they go through a process where they meditate upon nature of reality. They shut themselves from the sense objects, understand that I am beyond this, I'm beyond that, I am this and not that, neti kind of philosophy, and so many other ways, and they eventually come to an understanding. So this is the Indian tradition. Now, such a kind of understanding can never happen in the Abrahamic tradition. What is the role of meditation over there? What is the role of contemplation over there? Meditation there cannot go to a state where they realize I am Brahman or I am Yahweh. It cannot go there because that is blasphemy over there. There is a separation between the creator and the created in that tradition. The Yahweh in the creation is not belonging to this universe, literally. And the prophetic tradition is what is needed to communicate Yahweh. So how much ever you meditate, if you say you're Yahweh, you'll be stoned to death in the tradition. So there's no way, even if you say you're a prophet, you'll be stoned to death in some of these traditions. So this is not at all the case in Indian tradition. So there is a fundamental difference when you, Esther G, when you say that there is a role of meditation in Indian context and the meditation you see in the Abrahamic context, there are differences. So I hope I covered some aspects of the answer here.
Yes, and I also want to add there that in fact it is also blasphemous to do practice contemplative meditation in the Christian tradition. So while in the seminary we were made to write papers why contemplative meditation is satanic. So not only can you not equate yourself with the Brahman, with the creator, you cannot be a co-creator with the creator, but you also cannot participate or do practice contemplative meditation. And I also want to add that in the Mosaic kind of revelation or the biblical revelation, they're always hearing voices from heaven. They're always getting guided, inspired. But I think in the Indic contemplation, meditative state, they're not hearing any voices from any bearded guy in the sky, right?
No, it does not. It does not happen that way. Metaphorically, a Rishi might say that after they were contemplating for some time, Narada Rishi came and gave them some knowledge, or some other Rishi came and gave knowledge. But these are metaphorical understandings that knowledge did come to you at some point of your understanding. Knowledge came to you. And to discuss that, like I said, how do you describe a process where you don't have the jargon for that understanding? How do you describe that? How do you describe to a people who have no idea what an atom is or electron is or something? You go to a society like that, you try to explain the atomic model. How do you possibly do that? So you go to that culture and you take the iconry over there, you take the language and the metaphors they have, and you try to fit this atomic model to that particular metaphor and talk. In a similar context, when our rishis saw far beyond the jargon or the language at that time, they used the metaphors of the divinities, because each divinity was associated with some aspect of Prakriti. For example, Indra with a certain thing, Varuna with Agni, and so on. Every divinity had some kind of attribute or direction or property or aspect, if you will. So these understandings were used as a stand-in for the phenomena that you want to discuss. So when a Rishi comes and says that Narada came and instructed me, they are intending to communicate a certain manner of understanding of reality. So this is what we see in our tradition. So there's no voices coming and telling you, but there is a darshan. We get a darshan. Darshan is a very deep word in the Indian context, and our rishis might get a darshan, and they might get understanding based upon that. There is no hearing of voices, if you will.
Right. So these days, I mean, of late, the Christian fundamentalists have come up with another theory, and this is what is selling these days. So most of the other models that I discussed, like progressive creationism or day age theory or the gap theory, I think not all of them subscribe. Well, some of them do. But intelligent design is something that almost all the Christians today are clinging to. So, I think there has been a lot of setbacks that they have sustained from the supporters of the scientific way of understanding the beginnings of the universe. So because of which the fundamentalists have come up with something called intelligent design. So is that science? Because that's what they're saying.
Okay. So that's an excellent question, Esther. So I love the historic tradition. So I try to see in the historical thought process, how did these ideas develop? So like you said in your show excellently, that there was this young earth creationism which initially started because our understanding of science was so incredibly ignorant. And that led, when science developed an understanding of the age of the universe, dinosaur fossils, and plate tectonics, which happens in billions of years and in millions of years. So eventually there is a group of Christians who try to reconcile science, and this old earth creationism came about. And like you excellently put them in various kind of understandings, this gap theory, and so on and so forth, several of those forces. And I was in the US in 1990s doing my PhD when I was in near Portland, Oregon, and in Seattle, an institute called Discovery Institute. That came in the news because they were the biggest proponents of this intelligent design. And I was shocked at the kind of things they were saying, because I came to the US saying this is a powerful country where there is a lot of science and these kinds of things. And to look at these people coming and pushing dogma over here in the guise of science was an eye-opener to me, saying how thin the veneer of rationality and logic is over here. You can see that these guys are steeped in fundamentalism still. This is how I see intelligent design. Intelligent design is something that allegedly has got professors in biochemistry, professors in physics, various professors in leading universities, some, I will not say many, some professors who profess that the notions that we have, for example, in Darwin way of evolution or other kinds of evolution, there are some mistakes in our understanding. And they try to show that wherever science does not have an answer to a certain problem, and the deeper you go into science, eventually you'll hit a barrier in our understandings because we don't know what is beyond that. That barrier doesn't mean that this is where God starts and science fades. It does not mean that. It just means that our theories we understand until this point, and to go beyond that, we need new models, new understandings, new hypotheses, new lab methods, and try to test out hypotheses and understand. This is the nature of science. However, intelligent theory comes in, design comes in and says, aha, you see that is where the God comes. This is the initial way that they started with. Later on, they tried to show that evolution cannot be a random process. Evolution shows the hand of the creator. The intelligent creators over here, there, and his plan and his design seems to be playing out. So much of what they've been discussing tries to fit into this paradigm that there is a creation network, a planned creation network, although it fits the timelines that science is saying. A planned creation is at work rather than a random process. To critique them, I'll very quickly try to address this. We'll have to understand what natural selection itself is, what is evolution. When Darwin went out there, he had no idea about genetics and other such things. That was not yet, that field is not developed. But he was able to observe things like Galapagos Island. He went on a ship called the Beagle, and he studied about the finches and the beaks and the adaptations and the environmental niches that they fall in. And he made some observations. And to give an idea, if there is a remote island somewhere, and in that remote island, let us say there are two kinds of mice. One is a white mice, other one is a brown mice. And let's say there are some hawks on that island also. The hawks like to eat the mice. And the hawks can see the white mice better than they can see the brown mice, because the brown mice is blending along with the soil and they're camouflaged. So let us assume that it can only see the white mice. And the hawks hunt the white mice. So what we are seeing over multiple generations is the brown mice has got an environmental advantage. It has got an evolutionary advantage where it can fill a niche. It can fill an environmental niche over here. And that is what we're seeing, evolutionary niche rather. It can fill in that and it will survive. So Darwin observed things of this nature when he came and proposed his natural selection, that over generations, certain environmental or evolutionary advantages will be promoted in future generations. And certain evolutionary triads that are not advantageous to fill that niche will be discarded in generation over generations. This is his understanding. And that obviously, like you pointed out in your talk, the Scopes trial and other such things, it led to enormous fervor in the US and so on. However, along with this natural selection, today we understand there is macroevolution and there is microevolution. And what is microevolution? Microevolution is something we can reduce down to the allele frequencies. Alleles are in our DNA record. When the familiar DNA that we have and the four amino acids that form that, A, C, T, G, if they occur in slightly different ways in a DNA record, then that's called an allele. That is what an allele is. So today we studied about allele frequencies. Why do they change over time? There are 3 or 4 processes that cause that. For one is called gene flow. For example, if there is a population, let's say Indians living in India, and these Indians, let's say it's a remote point in the past, they went and migrated and settled in some other place, let's say in Europe or somewhere like that. So Indians introduce a genetic content into Europe or Central Asia, and you suddenly see genetic content introduced there that did not exist there at that point. For example, the R1A, the so-called R1A. So Indians might have introduced it over there. We also see mutation. Mutation is when, let's say, in the process of copying, in the meiosis process, when the cell is dividing into 2 with gene pairs from both parents, at that point, the copying may not be exact. The copying might introduce copy errors in the genetic record, chromosomal record, where perhaps some section is inverted, maybe some section is deleted, maybe some section is duplicated. All these kind of copy errors can happen. And sometimes these mutations persist. And so this is one more process by which microevolution happens. Then finally, genetic drift. Genetic drift can just be because of small random changes that accumulate over time. That is genetic drift. So today's microbiology and evolutionary biology is telling us that these are the evolutionary forces. The natural selection is one, gene flow is another, mutation is another, genetic drift is another. So this is in stark contrast with what some of the early creationists were saying, that, for example, species are created in their perfect form and there is no question of drift. That's a discarded idea now. Now the intelligent design people are coming and saying, all right, let's accept all of these things. But you see, there are some complex organs that we have in our body. For example, the eye. They see the eye is such a complex instrument where you have this cornea, you have the retina, you have the eye lens, you have the optic nerve that's connected to your brain in a certain way, the visual purple that you have, visual cortex that you have, and all these kind of things. And they say, even if you remove one small component in this machinery, that organ ceases to function as that organ. So because of the enormous dependency of every intervening process to give you the vision, they claim that it shows signs of design. It is not an evolved product over time, but it shows signs of a design. So this is the kind of idea that intelligent design come up with. However, this very eye itself was studied by evolutionary biologists, maybe in the late 1990s, 2000s. And they discovered in the deep sea vents and other places where even sunlight and other things don't come, they found organisms living there which had photoreceptor cells. No eye, but photoreceptor cells. And they showed in the evolutionary record with the fossil record how intermediate stages went on to form what we call the human eye, not just human eye, insect eye, compound eye, the regular eye we have. All these things is a perfect record that we have at the genetic level and as well as the macro level. So there's a clear understanding. So this is a big rebuttal to the intelligent design people who said that organs like kidney, like the heart, that the eyes, these show signs of design rather than, it's the same expression of what was there earlier. Earlier creationists said species were created in the final form exactly by a designer. In a similar form, the intelligent design people say eyes, kidneys, and other things are not evolved products. They seem to have been designed in a particular state. So time and again, we see science is rebutting the claims of these people. And they're fond of making some assertions. For example, people will come and say, let's assume that you got a workshop, a big factory with nuts, bolts, and other such things, and a huge tornado comes and hits that workshop, and things are flying here and there. And when the tornadoes are over, do you expect a fully assembled Boeing 747 over there? You don't, because you don't expect a Boeing 747. They claim that this whole business of random change is bogus. That is their claim. However, the way the problem has been posed is incorrect. It is not just one tornado that comes over there. Secondly, things are not assembled in their final state evolution goes through intermediary stages where the scaffolding means you, for example, when you build a building, in India, for example, in the old days, we used to tie bamboo sticks and other things, scaffolding. People can walk up and down. It holds the walls together till such time it has taken root, then you remove away the scaffolding. Evolution too shows scaffolding over time, and the scaffolding has gone away because we no longer need those crutches. So we see signs of that. So this whole analogy of one tornado coming and hitting there and making a 747 is a wrong analogy to have here. If instead you say that you have a mold over there, empty mold, and every time a tornado happens, that mold gets filled and so on, then you can expect a final product to come in certain form, perhaps. If not an engineering product like an aeroplane, certain other things can happen because there are multiple phenomena happening at the biochemical level, at the microchemistry level. Certain reactions are happening. For example, if you take the Krebs cycle, if you take there are physical cycles and biological cycles. Physical cycles like the cycle, for example, or the water cycle, starting from water evaporating and precipitation and coming back on Earth. This is the water cycle, physical process. In the body, we have got the glucose cycle, the Krebs cycle, how glucose is taken in and so on. So at this level, certain things are happening. You cannot randomly change something over there and expect that it will tolerate it. No, there are some laws at work that will prevent certain things from happening, some robustness to the process that will prevent something else changing it, and so on and so forth. Sometimes maybe there's a mutation in the Krebs cycle that will give an advantage. Maybe because of that change, the intake of glucose is more, so that organism has got more energy and maybe it can fill an environmental niche over there. Such things can happen, but it has got to fall in line with the biochemistry over there. So there are laws that govern how a process is put together. It's not any random thing slapped together making a final product. In fact, that was the state of Europe. That is the state of Europe for the longest time. They thought you take rotting meat and throw it into a dirty corner, and after some time, life comes over there. Because the maggots would come over there, maggots will become flies. They thought life happens spontaneously. Spontaneously, it'll happen over there. Until such time, Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope and looked at organisms under the water and other such things. They understood the nature of microbiology. So another example people say is the typing monkeys. For example, they say if you have a room full of typing monkeys or typing for hundreds of years continuously, can they produce a work of Shakespeare? It's not possible, right? Therefore, randomness is ridiculous. However, again, the experiment is set up incorrectly. If you have rules, the rules, like I said, are like the Krebs cycle, is resistant to certain changes and so on. So if you take a typing monkey, if it types some rubbish, let us assume there's a rule that will knock that word off and goes to a waste paper basket. Only if the monkey types a correct word in a dictionary, that word will be accepted. And only if that word falls in the context of the known grammar rules, that word will be accepted. If you do that, then over thousands of years of typing, eventually you'll have meaningful statements coming out of this whole thing. Similarly, you can have filters for the style of Shakespeare, for the style of other things, and so on. And guess what? Eventually it will come. If you have a sufficiently long experiment, it will come. So time and again, we see intelligent design as a retrogressive idea that tries to position any unknown in science as a work of the creator or a creator God or some such thing, or a purpose-driven creation and these kind of things, which we can show is meaningless. For example, we have so many evolutionary dead ends. Evolution leads to several dead ends because of the way it happens in a random process. Does this mean the intelligent creator God is clueless about what is going to happen and he wastes his creation so much by going into these evolutionary dead ends? So that's a question we need to ask the intelligent design people. So there are many questions over there, Esther.
Okay, now I think we are almost out of time. So, Esther, do you have anything else to ask? Because I have one question to ask also.
Yeah, please go ahead. I mean, I would have loved him to, loved Raj Vedam ji to rebut the watchmaker analogy. But yeah, since we are short of time, Sanjay ji, you can.
No, if you can do it quickly, it's fine. Watchmakers analogy.
I mean, all these all these analogies that the intelligent design people, all these arguments that they put forth have been debunked and refuted again and again, but they hold on to them like, they have discovered like their theory is science. So they continue to hold on to it.
So
And
they are
at
not
this
going to
point, I
change.
think
The
it's
only
just
thing
a
is that
strategy.
we can educate their target audience. That's what we can do.
Right. Right. I think the critique has got to come in the models and methodologies that they propose. They propose a hypothesis based on certain models and understanding of evolutionary process. And if we can show the scaffolding, if we can show the dead ends, if we can show all of these things, here is where are the holes in their understanding. And I think the role of science is to come and say, look, here you're not understood these processes clearly enough to make these claims that you're making, that the hand of a creator, intelligent creators. Same with the watchmaker analogy, similar to the Boeing 747 analogy, that the watch is created so intelligently, how can the random processes put together a watch? And the same kind of thinking is over there also. Like I said, if you put together certain rules for the way things will happen, given a certain period of time, things will happen. And today we find the most evidence of that in the quantum world, in what we're exploring in the quantum world, quantum realities, alternate realities, multiverses. So these things are being explored seriously, that several possibilities can be there. It's only our observation of reality that collapses reality into what we are seeing right now. So such kind of thinkings are also entering into physics and others today. So I think one has got to critique the models, the hypothesis, the methodology, and the claims coming out of that. If we did that, then we are on firm ground.
Right. You mentioned the singularity, right, Raj Vedam?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that this singularity is also being used by the church as something to bolster creationism. And we have important critics coming out from someone like Dr. C.K. Raju. You might have heard about his theory of
Yes.
the arrow in time.
Mm-hmm.
That is critiquing the superlinear time model.
Right.
Even Einstein, when he proposed the curvature in nature of time, that actually debunked the superlinear time and the basis of the fundamental basis of Christianity, in fact, fundamental basis of Abrahamic religions. So singularity is also one of those ideas which actually bolster creationism. I don't know whether you're in touch with Professor Subhash Kak and you've looked at his E-dimension model.
Right.
I think
Yes, I have. Very fascinating. Yes.
If you apply the E-dimension model, then the Indian cosmology gets explained perfectly, and all these creationist ideas, including singularity, they simply go out of the window.
Right. So one will have to continually look for better and better models that fit our understanding of reality.
Can you just explain the E-dimension model for the benefit of our audience?
Good question. That's a good question. So I think to understand the nature of that, one will have to step back a little bit. I'm not an expert. Let me first say that it is Dr. Subhash Kak's model, and he understands it better than any of us. This is my little understanding of that. If you go to the nature of reality, like today we look at our three-dimensional existence, we also say that time is a fourth dimension, if you will, and things proceed along in this kind of path for us. A reality unfolds in a certain way. Now, when trying to understand the standard model of the atomic physics and so on, and trying to have a theory for everything, if you will, which is the holy grail, to use Christian terminology, for sciences to try to see, is there a theory that explains everything? People quickly understood there are phenomena that cannot be explained because of the, if we can call it, randomness. There is randomness in a certain behaviors at certain quantum levels that we don't understand too well. So what is driving that randomness? Understanding that model is where we go. Right? Because if we say everything is random versus everything is driven, it is coming to a quantum level understanding of intelligent design versus random kind of works. In the intelligent design, everything is being driven by a purpose. There is a purpose and something is driving across and certain things are happening. Whereas in the random world, it's all a chance occurring. So if you go deeper and deeper into the standard model, we find random phenomena. For example, if an electron has got to go from one energy state to a higher energy state, it can absorb exactly a quantum of energy to do that. And once it goes to a higher state, It does not stay there forever. It will come back to its earlier state by releasing some energy, h nu, where the frequency of radiation is equal to the quanta of energy that had taken over. So this is our understanding from these models. And as you go in the particle accelerator and break these things up, you see more and more particles over there, subatomic particles. You try to understand these things. It led to certain problems in the understanding of these models. Early on, the people who proposed string theory. String theory came about by saying all of these random behaviors and other things can be reconciled perfectly if we assume a 11-dimensional model or a 13-dimensional model, depending on which string theorist you talk to. And they said that these higher dimensions are hidden in a space of dimension less than Planck's constant. And because of that, you can see these higher order behaviors happening, and you can explain the nature of reality perfectly well. This is their claim. And string theory is powerful at explaining a lot of things also. But it is a model where until such time one can validate these things. To give an idea, supposing you're living on a sheet of paper on a 2-dimensional existence, and you're a 3-dimensional being walking on that sheet of paper, and there are some 2-dimensional beings walking, as and when you put your footstep over there, they say, aha, as an impression happened over there. Then you walk somewhere else and see, oh, there's a random thing over there. How did that happen? How did this happen? Because in the 2-dimensional world, it cannot envision that there is a body in the 3-dimensional world whose leg is lifting up and going there, lifting up and going there. There's a predictive motion to it. So as you go to a higher dimension, some of these random behaviors of the lower dimension can sometimes be explained. So in this understanding, string theorists came about with this higher dimensional model. Now, Professor Kak's model is talking about fractional dimensional spaces. He's talking about fractional dimensions. E is this constant 2.718. Excuse my poor understanding, remembering of these numbers, constants. But 2.7.
Euler's constant. Euler's constant.
Yes, some number. Oh, good. Thank you. So Professor Kak proposes that if space is considered as fractional, there's a dimension which is fractional, rather than everything being integer quantities like 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, of each of these integer dimensions, which is a fractional dimension. He was able to explain with that theory about the curvature of space-time, and other such things. It is a model. It's an excellent idea, something that I went, whoa, and said, all right, I never questioned this need for integer dimensions alone. Professor Kak's model is saying fractional dimension, and that put a thought into my head of saying, what can we make out of this? So I'm not an expert in this, but all I can say is that it is a marvelous idea.
What it does is that it actually explains the Sanatan cosmology of infinite expansion and contraction, which our singularity-based present 3-dimensional space model cannot explain, because according to this, everything is just expanding out of a singularity. And,
right. But even there,
three-dimensional model actually explains the expansion as well as contraction.
True. Even in the existing models, Stephen Hawking was asked what was there before the Big Bang, and he had no answer to that because he has no notion of time. Also began with the singularity, according to his thinking. So they proposed that either expansion will happen continuously, going to a point where over trillions upon trillions upon trillions of years, all of matter and everything will just become nothing but radiation in a cold space. This is the model that is currently being proposed for the demise of the universe, if you will, from where we are today, given the expansion rate of the galaxies that we see. This is the fate of the universe, according to them, where after all the black holes have dissipated, after all the stars have extinguished, black holes have dissipated into Hawking radiation and other such things, eventually even matter will be completely deconstructed into nothing but waves. This is the kind of thinking. So there are another group of people saying that, wait a minute, our models cannot be linearly extrapolated like that because there is much that we don't understand about the cosmos, the nature of dark energy, the nature of dark matter. We don't understand these things too well. We understand that the visible universe is a very small fraction of the matter that we can estimate in the universe, very small fraction. So the question is, what is the physics of this missing matter that we cannot see or measure? what is the nature of the physics of that? Will the physics be as you're extrapolating, or there's something else? Therein was born the idea that maybe expansion will go till it reaches a maximum when some equilibrium happens between forces opposing expansion and the expansion forces. And eventually the forces opposed expansion will take over, and you'll see a deflating universe. So there is inflation maximum and a deflation going towards big bounce, if you will. And this is cosmology, it's called the big bounce model. So the big bang and the big bounce. So it goes through a recurrent cycle. So such a model has been proposed by several people, and recently, what is his name? Roger Penrose. He's a physicist from Oxford, if I'm not mistaken, astrophysicist. He got a Nobel Prize for this too, just last year. Last year's Nobel Prize is awarded for this kind of cosmology, where they understood the nature of the black holes, they understood the nature of radiation and other such things. So he had proposed that in our universe, in the current cosmic microwave background, he has measured certain anomalies in the microwave background, and he's got a thesis which says it is cyclical conformal contraction, CCC. That is a theory that he has there. And he's saying that these anomalies are the remnants of the black holes of the prior universe. So the remnants of the black holes of the prior universe are present over here, which I have evocatively, I call this as Vasana. I said the universe is alive, it has got Vasana. It's a previous black holes are guiding the evolution of the present universe, and he can measure these things in this cosmic microwave background. He's not a crank, he's got a Nobel Prize, like I said, and these are theories of his that you can read. So even in today's models, with better and better models, we'll try to understand the nature of some of the physics that we can only guess at. Maybe future physics will do that. In this context, Professor Subhash Kak's model is excellent because it is bringing about the idea of fractional dimensions. And can these fractional dimension physics, can that try to explain some of the phenomena that we have? Yes, excellent thinking. But one has got to see there are several models. One will have to take every model and study and see which is the model that is best suited for our understanding.
Quite right. And actually, Professor Kak has got his idea from the Vaisheshik Sutras, just as the quantum physicians, many of them got their ideas from Vedanta. So now I think we will move to the audience questions. We have a few. And before that, once again, I request all my viewers to please subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, share the video, like the video, and of course, support us on Patreon and on through other methodologies. Questions, answers.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Yeah, the questions can come in. Raji, have you heard about the irreducible complexity while discussing intelligent design? Do you know their theory? The irreducible complexity is the argument that, that says that certain biological systems cannot have evolved by successive small modifications to pre-existing functional systems. So that's what the irreducible complexity argument is all about. So they're basically denying evolution.
Right. Thank you, Esther. That is their jargon for this I that I talked about. I is a complex organism which cannot have evolved. It shows a sign of design. So they call this process as irreducible complexity, with the idea that even if you take one of these components out, this whole thing falls apart. Yes.
But I would say creationism is, basically after all that we have talked about, the e-dimensional and all those multiverses and the quantum fields and all that, I would say creationism is complexity reduced.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the kind of complex universe that we are living in, they have actually reduced it to just 6 literal days, which means they have reduced the complexity. And I would say it's a complexity reduced model.
True. It is a model. We can put it that. It is a model that explains reality, and it satisfies some people. But if we are a rational, logical person in search of reality and answers, you find that that model fails. So that model can only be a primitive understanding, which you must discard soon and seek other models that explain reality much better.
Correct. Yeah. Sanjay ji, we could go on and on and on. I would just want
I
you to
know,
move
but
on.
now we have to go to the audience questions, certainly, because
Yes.
this is a strange question. I think it's more of an observation. Professor Antarctica is Lord Vara, son of Lord Vara, and Devi Bhumi is planet Mars. It's referring to the metaphors of the Puranas. USA is controlled by Lord Shukra, Lord Shani, Lord Rahu, along with Asuras, Nagas, who interbred with humans. Nazis won World War II. Anyway.
It's a bizarre statement, but
Bizarre
I do hope
statement.
that he's in our reality, not some altered reality.
Anshul Sharma. That looks like coming from a creationist, actually. Anshul Sharma, what was the reason that post-Renaissance period most Christian countries got knowledge and became powerful? What repository of knowledge they got their hands to?
So
Rajji.
if I can take the question.
Yes.
Yes. If I can address that, Esther,
Yes, please.
Sanjay ji. So
Yes,
in my talks, I talk about this extensively, pointing out how after Bin Qasim's invasion of Sindh, a lot of Indian knowledge landed up in Baghdad, including the Baghdad House of Wisdom, where Sanskrit texts were translated into Arabic. We know works of Brahmagupta, works of Charaka, Shushruta, all of these works are translated, and it formed the corpus of Muslim understanding of arithmetic, algebra, geometry, medicine, and so on. It formed a corpus of their works. From Baghdad, this knowledge was injected all the way up to Spain because it was all controlled by the Umayyad, the Abbasid Empire, if you will, from Sindh, going all the way through Arabia, Iran, and through Egypt, through Tunisia, Morocco, Algiers, all the way up to southern Spain was controlled by the Muslims, including Italy, Sicily part of Italy. So Indian knowledge translated into Arabic was injected into these lands, and from the 10th century onwards, this was translated into Latin. For example, in Toledo, in Spain, northern Spain, there's a Christian monastery whose only job was to translate the Arabic text into Latin. One name from the past is Gerard of Cremona, who translated 87 Arabic texts into Latin. And we know among those texts were Indian texts, Sanskrit texts translated into Arabic, translated into Latin. That is how medieval Europe, which was completely under the clutches of the church, ignorant, illiterate, using Latin numerals and all of these kind of things, unable to do anything in science, this is how they got their understanding of astronomy, of numbers, of medicine, and so on. And I've shown a lot of evidence for this in my talks. So this was the seeding for the Western people to slowly grow with science till it came to the Renaissance period. It was frowned upon by the church because the Catholic Church was full of Indian mathematics, algebra, sciences. They looked at anybody taking knowledge from the Muslims as working with Satan. So when they had reconquered Spain, they went through a process of Inquisition. That Inquisition was to rid the place of all the knowledge. So many of these guys hid their sources. They refused to say that they got knowledge from Arabic texts, which is in turn Indian texts. Each of the so-called Renaissance scholars started saying that they invented this themselves. And so we saw enormous Indian knowledge systems coming into Europe at this time. And one more critically important thing, the Gutenberg printing press. That was invented around this time, late 1500s, 15th century, 1498. And from that time on, the knowledge dissemination was much more efficient than the past. Today, we are talking over YouTube, over internet. But in those days, you had to go physically to a library and copy down the text from that particular library. You had to do that. So similarly, in the ancient world, where there are no books either, a traveler would have to go to a monastery where they have parchments and other things and laboriously copy those things and take it across thousands of kilometers to his home country. And that's how knowledge was disseminated. So after the printing press came along, suddenly knowledge was democratized. You could print a book and bind it, and you could send it off to various parts of Europe, and people could ramp up on knowledge systems. So this happened around, like as I said, 1498 1500s,
1440, sorry, 1440.
Yeah, coinciding with the so-called Renaissance, and led to the growth of knowledge systems. So we see certain things came together. Gestation period with Indian knowledge systems from 10th century to 15th century, along with understanding of knowledge through the printing of books, along with finally throwing out the Roman numerals. Latin numerals were used in Europe till around the 15th century and so on. There was a German called Adam Ries. He wrote a book for the calculators of his time. Calculators were not our mechanical or electronic calculators of today. These are people in Europe whose job it was to keep records using Roman numerals, using abacus and things like that. When people wanted some commerce calculations to be done, they don't know how to do it. They'd go to one of these calculators, like our accountants today, if you will, and they would do these things. So Adam Ries wrote a book for these calculators saying how one could use the Hindu numerals along with the decimal place value system, how you could use that for very efficient mathematics, arithmetic, and so on. It is only after that book became widespread popular with the printing press and so on, then did Europe finally get rid of Latin numerals and other things. It's very, very unwieldy. So that unleashed this whole process of thinking. Less than 100 years later was Newton. So you can imagine, Newton just came 100 years later after this adoption of Indian numerals. So I hope that answers your question, Anshul Sharma. This is the reason why.
Yes. Next one. Yeah, this is the question. Next one. Okay, real Alex Jones. Okay, I want all Hindus to see rituals at CERN Institute. Lord Shani gave human science, best student to Lord Shiva. Saffron, entire story is seen, including human ego sacrifice, Lord Shani, Satan, Saturn.
Okay, I think Alex Jones is living in a slightly different universe over here, or is perhaps mocking the metaphorical use of ancient Indians to describe phenomena. In today's world, Alex Jones, there is no need for using metaphorical understandings because we have got jargon for these things. We got a lot of jargon that can explain phenomena, and we can easily use this. By trying to mock this kind of understanding of ancient Indians, you're displaying enormous ignorance about the past, how knowledge was transmitted, how Sanskrit was not a linear language. It was a language that could encode tremendous information in a terse prose. In a very terse prose, you could communicate a lot of information because of the metaphors encoded over there. If one understands the metaphors, then one would understand how to interpret that verse. So by mocking this, in a sense, you're mocking the understanding that Indians had and the enormous value placed on understanding Sanskrit, metaphoric language, and trying to communicate enormous amounts of information in short sentences.
Next. Chetan Pai, hello ma'am. Why is South Korea predominantly Presbyterian? Do they operate missionaries in India?
Does he mean does South Korea operate missionaries in India, or does the Presbyterian
whether
Church
the
operate
Presbyterian operate in India?
Yeah, the Presbyterians. There are Presbyterians. But the latest, after this interdenominational, the evangelical kind of brand of Christianity took over, all these, the Wesleyans, the Presbyterians, the other denominations have actually been relegated to the backseat. So it's Presbyterians do operate. They were very, very active just before the onslaught of the evangelical brand of Christianity.
Okay, next. Mitul Panchal, how genetic mutation can be explained
by intelligent design?
Intelligent design.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So, I guess when you're talking about mutation, one has got to see what are the forces that are acting on mutation. And our best understanding is that it is a random process. It's a random process. Whether it is impacted by environmental conditions, whether it is impacted by some biochemistry of the cells that causes certain aspects of the genetic exchange to happen and mutation to happen. Yes, all of these factors probably also play a role in this. eventually we can say that there is certainly some kind of randomness over here. Now, in the Indian context, it's important to also understand some of these things. Like I said, if you take a phenomena to a higher dimension, are all these laws apparent? Is it there's no randomness at a higher level, and maybe all these things, there is a design. So at the level of understanding where we are in the genetics and so on, we can get away with a model by saying these are random processes. These are random processes that cause random mutations and so on to occur. In some cases, we can definitely say it is this chemical presence in the body or this kind of activity that causes this kind of mutation to happen. We can say in some cases things. In several cases, like I said, genetic drift and other such things, these are purely random processes that are happening. Even today, as we are speaking, our body is undergoing tremendous activity at the cellular level. At the cellular level, you're seeing very, very rapid expressions of proteins, very, very rapid expressions of genetic content, and so on. There is damage happening at the cellular level, and there's repair happening at the cellular level, regeneration happening, and so on. So if you want to discuss at a single given genetic location in a certain cell, what is the mutation that is causing it to happen, I'm sure if simulation technology, modeling technology progresses to that extent, one might say this environmental condition, this chemical condition caused that. But our best way of today grossly talking about this is it's a random mutation taking place. Intelligent design cannot explain it. It cannot explain. At most, it can say there is an intelligent hand at work doing all of these things. But that does not permit science to progress.
Okay, we have very interesting questions next. Vishwas Chandraganti asking, what is the similarity between Mandelbrot's set and Professor Kak's theory?
I must confess ignorance. Mandelbrot set is the evolution of patterns given some elementary numbers and simple rules, how these patterns increase at various levels of complexity. You go and see the same pattern repeating over there. But Professor Kak is best set to answer this because I don't want to misrepresent what he has done. So please do contact Professor Kak for that.
Okay, next. Okay, so that brings to end today's show. All the questions answered. Thank you very much, Dr. Raj Vedam, and thank you, Esther, for being on the show. I think we have dealt with many important areas, and we have probably, in fact, why should I say probably? I would say certainly debunked this whole idea of creationism. So thank you once again to both of you, and thank you to all the viewers. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thank you, Rajji.
Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.